Hey guys, so good morning. And you never know when we're going to lose this channel. This is why I have so many shows scheduled out so far, because I want to stay on the trail, be diligent. Well, I did diligent about, getting the information out as long as we have a voice. Now, we've got the channel backed up, of course, on Odyssey, and we'll see how that goes. So far, so good. But, that's what's going on. So you're going to see a lot of shows scheduled. Best thing you can do is go to those shows and make sure that you set the reminder, because every single day there's a show. And if you don't do that, you're going to get behind. So make sure we're connected first, and we'll get on with the rest of the program today. Now, we got a couple of CV19 updates before we get into today's show. And according to this article from the New York Times, basically they're continuing the divide. And now men are to blame for not getting it. We have to call it now. Because it seems like everyone's calling it because of the silencing of the independent media. Now, many of you will remember the it clown, Pennywise, and how we broke down the symbolism behind the red balloons that were full of poison. We told you a few years ago that it was coming, and now it is here. And it's interesting because we have to call it because everyone's calling it. Isn't that interesting? So again, men, according to this article, are the ones standing in the way of herd immunity, which is like the community that's never heard, silenced. Let's read a little bit in this article. A man received CV19 VC in the Harlem section of New York, and Holly Elgison and Lynn are a mixed, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? A mixed VC couple. And they are far from alone. I was always going to get the VC, said this guy. Her husband, a disaster insurance adjuster, said he will pass. To be honest with you, I think that the worst of CV is behind us. Now, it's interesting that they highlight this viewpoint here. This is what's called a straw man viewpoint. Not a lot of people are refusing the VC because they think the worst of it is over. They're refusing it on other basis, on the basis of other things, on the basis of personal freedoms and having autonomy over your health. Not because they think the worst of this is over. That's a straw man. It was what they call it, a straw man reason. As the Biden administration seeks to get 80% of adult Americans immunized by summer, continuing reluctance of men to get it could impede that goal. So now men are being blamed. Unreal. Now, it's interesting because in my small circle of friends and family, it's interesting because it's actually true. The men are the ones who are not getting it. And oftentimes the woman will go get it first and then try to pressure the man into getting it. So, of course, the women in those situations are going to pull up articles like this. It says women are getting the VC at a far higher rate, about 10 percentage points, than men, even though the male-female divide is roughly even nationally. The trend is worrisome to many, especially as vaccination rates have dropped a bit recently. Reasons for the gender gap are many, reflecting the role of women in specific occupations that received early VC priority. Well, that would be the reason then, right? The article even says it here, that it's because they were in roles and it became available to them first. So what is the problem? They're also trying to say political and cultural differences and longstanding patterns of women embracing preventative care more often than men do. The gap exists even as CV blah, blah, blah. So this is what they're doing. They're trying to make this about the gender divide now. Now, what's interesting is that Slouchy has backed away from this whole concept of the turd immunity. He's backed away from it, but it seems like Bo Biden is still pushing for this. Now, this article is dated, looks like April 23rd, so not too long ago, last week. But this is where things are headed with this. Now, the reason why I think Bo Biden is pushing for this is because it's political, because he made a campaign promise, and he's trying to appear as though he's keeping that promise to reach herd immunity. Now, the problem with this is that they keep changing the science. In the beginning, that was set in stone that we're going to reach herd immunity, and now Slouchy's starting to back off of that. So, things keep a-changing. All right, looks like we're connected up here. Let's keep going with this. Now, here's an Australian article. Somebody just sent this to me. And in here, they try to basically fear anybody who refuses it. And they do this by suggesting that they'll lose all their family and friends, become isolated and alienated from the rest of the world because of their viewpoints on it. And this article reads like a how-to on handling like a wild animal caught in a cage and how to approach these people who don't want it because they're dangerous. And they start talking about tips and giving you tips about how to navigate conversations and to basically patronize anybody who's not refusing it so that you don't trigger them, so that, you can try to coerce them into taking it as well. And it's sad that the whole world has come down to this, that you have to actually defend your right to have autonomy over your personal health. This would be tantamount to a person shaming you for going and ending your pregnancy. Okay. And even people who are Christian would not shame someone after they made that choice, because the damage is already done. But imagine that this would be the same thing, like going into their personal medical history and basically shaming them. Now, it's interesting because this article is kind of funny, because they talk about how the people that got it are being rejected by their family and friends. They're told to stay home, don't come over. And you guys all know the reason for that. But they're using that as an extreme example as to why these people are dangerous, right? But this is what they're saying. Now, I'm not particularly afraid of people who already got it. I'm not afraid of them in terms of what they may or may not be, exposing me to. But you notice that the mainstream media is starting to lead with that, because what does it do? It makes us look crazy, right? Now, I know it's a possibility that that's happening, but what does the Bible say? The Bible says no weapon shall prosper against his people. Well, that would be a prime example. Now, I know many of you have experienced what you feel are changes, and that's probably the case. We'll have to run down that scenario. I know there's a lot of information out there on this. Unfortunately, we can't really talk about it here. Maybe I'll upload a video on the other platform and we can talk more about this. But this article actually talks about all of that, how people who are not getting it are afraid now of the people that did get it because of what they might be exposed to. So this is what's going on. This is the update on CV19, and we continue the struggle for our own autonomous freedom when it comes to our own health. And like I said, I never thought we'd get to the point where we'd have to have this discussion, but here we are. Now, what is going on with the scrootings, we have to call them? We're shifting gears a little bit here. We're going to talk about the police scrootings. And even in the aftermath of the big trial, the Chauvin trial, we have these scrootings going on. They're highly publicized. They're supposed to actually be releasing some footage of the last one that happened, where the girl had the other girl pinned up against a car with a knife and got scrot or shot. And so this is where we're at with all this. So basically, we're being shown these body cam footage from all these people, right? These cops, and then it's inciting violence. Now, of course, the people, the victims and all this have the right to see this body cam footage, but it's almost like this is all becoming intentional. They want civil unrest. Otherwise, they wouldn't be releasing the body cam footage. Otherwise, these cops wouldn't continue to screw people. So I thought about all this. I'm like, what is really the problem? What is the root cause of all of this and why this is happening? And I wanted to give you guys my viewpoint. What I feel needs to happen is that law enforcement needs to overhaul their rules of engagement. Now, if you think about all of these scrutings over the past, several years, and I'm not talking about the school scrutings, I'm talking about these racial scrutings that have happened. In almost every instance, we see what appears to be an unjustified scrutiny, right? And if they simply change this one rule of engagement, that these particular scrutings could have resulted in at least the preservation of life for the person on the other end. Now, you notice in that statement, I don't say anything about either side being a good guy or a bad guy. I don't say the cop's good or bad. I don't say the suspect is good or bad. But at least both live to see their day in court, and then they can face the consequences for their actions based on the jury of their peers, right? So here it is. Officers, as you know, if there's any law enforcement folks in the chat, are trained to aim for the body's core when they draw their weapon. Now, why is this? Well, they're trained to do this because the body's core is the biggest target. And to have the best chance of hitting the target, you have to aim for the biggest part of the target. But I think there's a fallacy with this, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But they're also trained that if they draw their weapon, that it's because they intend to use it. In other words, they're not supposed to pull it out of the holster unless they intend to use it. So there's all this psychological buildup to these events. Now, I'm not running cover or dismissing what is happening out there. But there's something that happens psychologically with all this training that they've gotten, that sets them up for the situation that unfolds. I can't possibly believe that some of these cops who've done some of these things would truly be able to live with themselves after taking someone's life. They have families that they have to be accountable to. They have the community that they have to be accountable to. So how do we change this? Well, it's the programming. You change the rules of engagement to adjust to the times. Now, there was a time where such rules of engagement, aiming for the body's core, were necessary, and there still are times where that is necessary. And that would be in the case of a suspect who has some kind of automatic weapon, who's already taken people out or is headed somewhere openly, and it's apparent that that's what they're up to. In other words, it's the level of threat, okay? Which we're not seeing that level of threat in these scrutings that have been happening, these racial scrutings, right? We're not seeing that level of threat. So why are they still aiming for the body core? Why are they aiming to kill? Why are they shooting to kill? Well, it's because they were trained to do that. Now, what happens when you aim for the body's core? Well, a couple things happen. One, if it was just one bullet, we have to call it, then the person might survive. But how often do they just shoot one bullet? They hardly ever do. It's always multiples, right? Because that's another thing that they're trained to do. You see how all the training is pointing to death? There is no alternative. And when the body's core is hit, let me go back in the chat as I'm talking to you guys here. As the body's core is hit, it almost always hits a vital organ. Many of you have seen like hunting videos here, even here on YouTube. And it's funny because we talk about censorship. Well, it's not funny, but it's interesting to extrapolate on that, because what you have is you're not even allowed to show blood in hunting videos anymore. Even cleaning a fish, there's too much blood. YouTube will unmonetize that video. And if your channel becomes full of unmonetized videos, they will actually kick you out of the partnering program or remove your channel altogether. So this is across the board. A lot of people are experiencing censorship, not just the truth community. Hunting and fishing videos particularly are feeling the pinch. In fact, they're not even allowed to clean an animal on video, as if someone couldn't just click away. They're not allowed to, because YouTube feels like their advertisers don't want to advertise on those kinds of videos, which is ridiculous. Because think about it. Wouldn't hunting knife manufacturers or the people that make the hardware to raise the deer up on the stands, to clean it, all the whole industry surrounding that kind of thing, hunting industry, they should have advertisers falling over themselves to want to advertise on videos like that. But according to YouTube, advertisers don't want to see that. Do you see the hypocrisy here? So back to this rules of engagement thing. So you aim for the biggest body mass and the organs are hit. Typically, even with like deer hunting, one bullet will usually do the trick. And so now imagine a human being being hit with multiples, and the odds of survival are very, very minimal. So why not instruct law enforcement that when the system or when the situation permits, instead of shooting multiple times, they shoot twice and they aim for the thighs or the legs instead, which would dramatically increase the rate of survival. Now, not all situations, of course, permit this, but a majority of the situations, especially the ones that we're seeing televised as unfair police scrutings, do permit for this. Persons sitting in a car, for instance, and it appears as though they're reaching for something. Why are you when you're at that close range, why are you aiming at their body core? Well, it's because they've been trained to do that. But instead, why not aim to the lap? You guys, when you are hit with a bullet, it hurts. I've never been shot before, but you're going to stop a person in their tracks. Now, I'm not implying that people that we're giving the cops carte blanche to just start shooting people in the legs and hips. What I'm saying is that the rule of engagement would preserve life, because that's what this is really about, right? Then let the family sue the cop after, pay for medical bills, and get their $5 million because they got shot in the legs, right? But the point of all this is to just outline the fact that aiming for the hips would drastically increase the likelihood of survival. And there wouldn't be this shoot to kill order, basically. So, let's think about the situation with the girl that was wielding the knife against the car and how that could have gone down differently. Obviously, she had a knife. Obviously, she was lunging for the other girl. But I think we would all agree that her butt was a pretty large target. And what if they shot her in the butt instead? It would have stopped her. 1 or 2 shots, she would have survived. She would have gone to jail for attempted you-know-what, because she was wielding the knife. It was all on videotape. The cop would have been a hero. And we wouldn't have all this racial unrest. Am I making any sense here to anybody? Does this make sense to you guys? Or is this something that it's a pipe dream? It's the whole structure and how it was set up from the beginning that is causing the division. You don't have to aim for the body's core all the time. And remember back in the day that officers used to fire warning shots? I can't even remember a time when that happened. I think we only see that in TV and movies. But why isn't there a warning shot fired? It's because they're taught that when their firearm is deployed, that they have to be aiming at a target and they have to be aiming for the body's core. There's no room for wiggling. There's no room for wiggle. And so there is no allowance for an officer to fire a warning shot. You see the problem here? The rules of engagement are too narrow. So let's backtrack a bit and talk about what happens when an officer aims for the thighs or the butt or the legs. Well, the suspect is still neutralized. The wound would range from, a through and through, which would be the best case scenario, which would still stop the person. Worst case scenario, they'd have a broken femur or a broken hip. Or it could hit the femoral artery, but we know that a tourniquet could be quickly applied, and at least you could still preserve someone's life. They could bleed out if there wasn't assistance given, but if every officer carried a tourniquet, we often see them trying to administer first aid, but it's already too late. Person's been shot multiple times through the body core. It doesn't matter how much life-giving assistance you give them, they're gonna die. We see this over and over again. But if they had a tourniquet, they shot the person in the butt or the hip, and even if they hit the femoral artery, apply a tourniquet, get him in the hospital, and then you go to court. And then the whole thing and how it played out is much different than the other scenario, which is a dead person and an enraged community. Now, this whole concept of multiple discharging of the firearm going off into one person, I never did understand that. And so would limiting the amount of times a person could deploy their weapon, wouldn't that be something that could maybe preserve life as well? Maybe training officers to notice if they have or have not hit their target, right? I mean, this is what hunters do. When they go hunting, they know whether or not they hit their target with the first, because they're most oftentimes dealing with a rifle, which can't be shot multiple times. So they got that one chance because they know the animal's going to run away. And if they miss, they have to reload and basically reset. Usually the animal's long gone. So why not help officers to understand that, hey, fire one time and assess the target. Did you hit the target before shooting a second round? I don't know. This just sounds like common sense to me. Hip shots, where do you place the tourniquet? Well, you would place it on the upper thigh, and the person's not going to bleed out right away because everything else is internal into the hip. I mean, the odds of you surviving a hip shot are much higher than a core shot. I think everybody would agree with that. Now, the people, they survive. Now you've got a day in court. The officer will face charges for the injury and unlawful shooting of the person based on the body cam footage. Family gets paid. The person in the hospital gets paid. I just don't see a downside to this. I don't see a downside to the scenario that we're talking about here. Now, what other rules of engagement could help change and improve the perception about law enforcement? Well, where are all the non-lethal force options? They could incapacitate people. Where's all this technology that should have changed policing over the last several decades? Why is it always bigger and badder and more force instead of more humane, non-lethal types of force? Why are we still using batons and tasers and higher caliber weapons? Why is that the go-to in the militarization instead of using more humane ways of handling policing? I thought a lot about this. I've had an inventive mind since I was born. One of the inventions that I came up with that never really took off was a wallet that fans out like a deck of cards. It's hinged in the middle so you could see all your cards, and it's made with see-through plastic. Now, of course, that never took off because the way that the Matrix is set up, it punishes people who have great ideas and don't have the money to develop those ideas, and then those ideas are stolen by corporate entities who do have the money. But the reason why I tell that story is because for a very long time I've thought about adhesive projectiles that are deployed from like a small cannon, and it would like gum up the suspect. A lot of times these situations just have to be de-escalated, and de-escalated rapidly. If you see someone that appears to be going for a GUN, why not pull out your adhesive projectile cannon first, gum them up? I know it sounds weird and it sounds silly. It kind of sounds like Spider-Man, right? A glob of very sticky stuff. Many of you have been in these kinds of situations where you've got something on your hands and it's so sticky you can barely move your hands, right? Well, this would be a scenario where you could deploy something like this. And I'm not talking about a little tiny bit of it. I'm talking about a basketball size full of like a glob that just goes onto the person's weapon, right? And you could have multiple people aiming at this person and then they can't move. You think with all the technology that we have out there, we can't come up with something like this? Now, the same concept would work with like some kind of projectile, like a sticky net. Like a net with like, it's all sticky, right? It comes out of this cannon and it wraps the person up. And again, it sounds like Spider-Man, right? But notice that even Spider-Man didn't really kill people. He just wrapped them up so the cops could come get him, right? And if it could save a life and de-escalate a situation immediately without causing bodily harm, why wouldn't we be looking at stuff like this? Why is it always aim for the core and the person's gone forever? I don't get it. Why is it straight from nothing to death in 5 seconds? Or why is it go from nothing to electrocution by taser or hit with a baton? There are other ways to incapacitate people. Now, someone mentioned active denial. And you know what? If they use that and were open and disclosed it for, suspects that would preserve their life, I don't have any problem with an officer using that. So if a person's, because if it's all on body cam, then it would be fine. But what I don't like is the secret program of active denial where they're going through streets and trying to break up protests without telling anybody. That obviously is very wrong. So, here's another thing. How about when 3 officers are surrounding a suspect who isn't complying, they shoot rubber bullets instead? Why is it always lethal force? Like that boy that was standing in the middle and he's like, let me see your hands, let me see your hands. And they all just unloaded on him. Why did they have to do that? There was nothing that boy could have done. He didn't have to die. And I know he was doing something bad, obviously, but he hadn't killed anybody, and he can face his day in court, go to jail for 20 years for whatever he did. Why not hit him with rubber bullets? He's gonna drop. And then guess what? Race relations improve because they preserved his life instead of taking it. And he goes to jail. Guess what? Cops look like heroes. But instead, we have the other scenario where there's this big question. Was it necessary to use lethal force, right? So, lethal force shouldn't be the go-to way that they get someone to comply just because they don't show you their hands. The rules of engagement need to change. Now, this is an opinion piece, and you can disagree, and that's fine. But this is what I'm wondering it needs to happen to change things in America. Let's go into the chat here. I mean, think about this. Tasers almost seem to, and batons almost seem to have the opposite effect. I think when an officer uses them, they're using them because they don't have confidence. They don't have true confidence in a taser. Will it hit the target? Will it incapacitate the person? Will it work in time? But if you had something that you knew for a fact, like a giant glob of goo or something, that would stop the person, then they would have more confidence in it. So this is what we're dealing with. And something tells me that this is intentional, that they intentionally don't want to change things because that continues the divide, right? All right, let's go into the chat here. Yeah, tasers don't work a lot, Chris. Yeah, they almost intentionally don't work. I've seen people that have been tased that it doesn't even work on them. We've seen the videos, you guys. They oftentimes don't work. So, non-lethal force. Where is that in law enforcement? De-escalation force. Neutralize the suspect. You don't have to kill someone to neutralize them. All right. Well, we'll be back on here tomorrow. Thanks to everyone that showed up. Thanks, Aphrodite. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Hardy Har. Unmasked. Focused Imaginations. I am a lone frog. Thank you for your perseverance. Rifleman, Flyboy. APC. The main arteries in the legs keep them from aiming at the legs. Well, we came up with a solution for that. Tourniquet. Yeah, you hit the femoral artery. You can still apply a tourniquet high up on the thigh and at least preserve the person's life. But hitting someone in the core is basically guaranteed death. And again, I gave the example of hunters and how they hunt. One single bullet placed in the body core of a deer will take the deer down. Anywhere in the body cavity. And I know, and if you've seen some of these deer, they're bigger than humans. So I think law enforcement downplays that. That's why they administer, CPR and stuff after they load someone up with 5 or 6 bullets. We already know they're not going to survive. And they downplay that. They downplay it because they know. So I love each and every one of you. Hope you guys all have a great day. We'll see you back on here tomorrow.